Cinelit. My name is Adam Marsh, and this episode we delve into the rich world of East Asian cinema with Derby Quad's programmer of East Asian cinema, Peter Munford. As ever, these podcasts are made possible by the kind support of Quad and BFI, and I have a lot of fun talking to Peter about the 5+2 films that he selected to talk about. It certainly made me want to go on a Jackie Chan binge-watching session. I hope you enjoy it too. Hello, welcome to Cinelit. Unfortunately for all you Daryl Buxton fans out there, Daryl is away on assignment this week, but he'll be back in the future, near future, I'm certain. So today has given me the opportunity to speak to someone I've wanted to bring on the podcast. I'm joined today by Peter Munford, programmer of Quad's East Asian Cinema Night, Satori Screen. Hello, Peter. How are you?
Hello, Adam. I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very, very good. Looking forward to this wide-ranging discussion on reasons why you love East Asian cinema. So you've been programming Satori Screen at Quad for 6 years, 7 years?
It's 8 in October, I think. 2012 started.
Goodness me. So that's quite a lot of films, and we've been hitting a monthly schedule ever since we started, really.
Yeah, up until March, when
certain other import from East Asia that we didn't really want long. 8 years, nearly 8 years of a range of films, and we've shown quite an eclectic mix of stuff. What are the ones that stand out for you as ones that you're pleased that we got the opportunity to screen?
The ones that I'm glad we've screened mostly are the ones that people wouldn't have been able to see any other way. Like very early on, we managed to get a 35mm print of a film from North Korea. So it's a film called Somi the Taekwondo Woman, through a weird series of events where this film had been made by a Japanese producer in North Korea with North Korean cast and crew. And he created one English subtitled 35mm print with the intention of trying to sell it around the world. This is late 80s. And then he totally failed to sell it. And this print had just been on a shelf in Japan for 30 years until Japanese cinema writer Jasper Sharp discovered it and brought it over to the UK, and we played at Quad and maybe 3 or 4 other venues, and that's the only times it's ever been seen outside of Asia. So that was a really exciting one, chance to see some North Korean cinemas, not something that travels normally.
No, certainly not outside the boundaries of North Korea.
Yeah, so that's memorable.
Yeah, I mean, that was impressive. It wasn't an impressive film. It was definitely a curiosity to watch. How great a film was it?
It wasn't an amazing film. It's not one where I'm like, oh, it's such a shame that no one else is ever going to get to see that film because it's a forgotten masterwork. But it was just interesting in many ways because it was a martial arts film, and you could see they were lifting from various things in Hong Kong cinema and stuff. But at the same time, you kind of got little insights into North Korean society from it. Things like the horses in it were all skinny. That's what I remember. All these horses where you could just see their ribs through. Things like that show you how the difference is and things like that. And
if skinny horses are your thing, Somi the Taekwondo Woman is the one for you.
Yeah, because I only ever got to see it once as well, and it was nearly 8 years ago, so I don't remember it with absolute clarity. I remember it being the lead character being very emotional, and Somi the Taekwondo Woman, so it was a female lead who was trying to gain vengeance and for her lost love, and her shouting "Youngam" a lot in a very overwrought way, which became a little catchphrase for a few weeks amongst me and the people that saw it at Quad. So that was a memorable one. And then just things like when I've managed to persuade an audience to turn up for things that they've never heard of, but I know I'll have fun with, like a film I plan to talk to you a bit more in detail later, like Lady Terminator, which was a film I'd been talking to anyone who'd listened to for years, saying there's this insane film from Indonesia called Lady Terminator, you've got to watch it, it's kind of terrible, but you'll never forget it. And sure, I managed to get an audience to turn up, and it went down the storm, and have people still occasionally see me in Quad later and say, Lady Terminator, though, I'll never forget that.
Should we move on to Lady Terminator then? Because that seems like a good place to start. You're a big film fan in general, Pete. In general, you like quality films. Why Lady Terminator then? Because it's a mess.
Yes.
I'm being kind there. It's a mess, isn't it?
Shall I do a little plot synopsis for those that have no idea what this is? You
can. I mean, I've seen the film, and I'm not sure I can do a plot synopsis.
An anthropologist doing research in Indonesia relaxes with a dip in the sea and suddenly finds herself possessed by the spirit of the country's mythical South Sea Queen. Upon returning to land, she is somehow transformed into the Lady Terminator and sets out on a mission of revenge against the descendants of those that wronged the South Sea Queen. Armed with an AK-47, she blazes a trail across the streets of Jakarta and it's up to the local cops to find seemingly invincible Lady Terminator down. It's a Terminator ripoff. There's no two ways about it. It lifts the plot. It lifts entire scenes in places where there's things that you'll remember from the Terminator. The scene where Arnie takes his eye out and that gets pretty much stolen. What else?
The nightclub scene was the nightclub at Tech Noir in Terminator is almost lifted and completely in this movie as well.
But James Cameron didn't have the balls to do an entire song performed on stage and stop the film for a 3-minute song performance. So
no, well, it's just not a very experimental filmmaker, is it? That's the thing, you know.
Things like it just takes things that bit further. Like in the Terminator, when Arnie appears and he meets the two punks, one of the Bill Paxton and the other guy, and they have a little interaction. And he kills them. In Lady Terminator, she has sex with them, then kills them. Just always taking things to that little next level. There's a lot of 80s attitudes
towards well, if she's a woman, therefore she's got to have sex with practically every character she meets in this movie. It starts off with a sex scene, 2 sex scenes, I believe, where she kills both men, and then she's wronged by the man who he doesn't kill, and that's her being wronged by not getting the opportunity to kill him.
Yes, well, but she does get her revenge on mankind generally in this film. There's a very memorable moment later in the film during again lifted from the Terminator, the police station assault sequence, where she unloads pretty much a whole clip from her gun into a man's chest and then kicks him in the balls for good measure once he's clearly very, very dead, which always gets a big laugh. And this film's got some amazing dialogue.
The one that really stood out to me. It's not particularly memorable, but it's just the early bits where she's on the boat and the boat captain's being horrible and misogynistic, and the woman and then the anthropologist goes, "I'm not a lady, I'm an anthropologist."
Yes, that's kind of one of the things this film is known for. It should be said as well that this film was shot in Indonesia, but most of the main roles are played by white people who it seems they've just grabbed off the street because it was a thing in the 80s for Asian cinema that was hoping to get seen outside Asia. Well, better put white people in it then, but they can't afford to import actors. So the lead cop is a white man for some reason working in the Indonesian police department. But at the same time, they're trying to fudge it. So maybe it's not Indonesia. Maybe it's set in the States. So it's really set in this kind of half Asia, half US milieu. They've got like stock shots of American cities at night and opening scenes and things like that. Oh, that's stuff like that I love, where just filmmakers are just trying to reach beyond their grasp. And I think it's a wonderful film. And this film played in American cinemas.
I'm stunned that it didn't get sued because Cameron's quite litigious.
But at the same time, Harlan Ellison had to take out a lawsuit against James Cameron for elements of the term. Yeah, so maybe he thought that would be hypocritical to then. Or maybe he wasn't aware of it for a decade afterwards. Who knows? But
yeah, because this one got a release, but obviously it gained in popularity in the last 10 years or so, hasn't it? With various different cult screenings.
Yeah, so it got an American DVD in about mid 2004, 2005 or something like that, which is where I first saw it.
Yeah,
and I'm waiting for the Blu-ray now. I need this film in pristine clarity.
This was released by Mondo Macabra.
Yes, Mondo Macabra, excellent company that turns up many weird and wonderful for the world that would be very difficult to see otherwise.
I think it was one of those movies that came to the fore through the book Mondo Macabra, Pete Toombs' excellent book on weird and wonderful cinema.
Yeah, and back in the early 2000s, do you remember 4 Later, which was a thing on Channel 4 where they had like a strand of late night programming with like Bits, the video game show, and Vids, the video shop show. Yeah, and I think off the back of that book, there was a show called Mondo Macabra, where they went and interviewed lots of these filmmakers around the world, and I think the Indonesia was one of those, and they went and found the director of this film and talked to him, and he's credited as Jalil Jackson, but apparently in Indonesia he goes by H. Jalil.
Because he did Mystics in Bali as well, didn't he?
Which is also very entertaining, but a little bit more competent, so probably not quite as good, if you follow my meaning.
A little bit more competent, which means what? I don't even know what that means after seeing Lady Terminator. You don't see boom mics in the show.
Yeah, just in terms of having the words coming out of people's mouths sounding like actual sentences that people might say. Like, there's a wonderful sequence in Mystics in Bali where there's a car chase, where the car being chased, the two guys in it are having an argument, and one of them just starts punching the other one in the face whilst they're being pursued by the police. which makes me laugh a lot. It's not quite as insane as Lady Terminator. Definitely worth seeing. I also remember in Mystics in Bali, there's a wonderful where Lady Terminator stops for a song for 3 minutes. Mystics in Bali stops for a bikini fashion show. There's just a 3-4 minute sequence where the main character and 2 of her friends try on a load of bikinis and pose for, which not something you see in films of 2020, really.
It's the Indonesian equivalent of a 3-minute shower scene.
Yeah, so it's kind of sexy, but also a bit chaste because Indonesia's got quite strict censorship laws. Apparently, Lady Terminator was banned in Indonesia, but not when it had already been out for about 10 days. Someone saw it and thought, hang on a minute, that it's probably quite unknown itself in Indonesia. It's probably better known amongst film geeks in the West than it is in Indonesia.
All right, well, let's move on to one of your next choices. I think being known in the West might be a nice little link to move us on to, arguably, at one point it was described as the most recognizable film star in the world, Jackie Chan.
Yeah, probably something to do with his films being action-packed films where you can watch them and get something out of them, even if the dialogue's not, you don't really need to understand what's being said. You just need to say, oh, Jackie's the good guy, there's some bad guys, they're now going to do some incredibly creative fight choreography for the next 10 minutes that's going to be very exciting. Yeah, so even in countries where they hadn't bothered to dub or do the subtitles, people would still be watching these films on VHS and stuff in the 80s, I'm sure. Yeah, the film I chose is Drunken Master. Plays Wong Fei Rong, an unruly teenager who's been resisting his father's attempts to teach him kung fu. In desperation, his father sends him to live with his uncle, who is master of the notorious drunken kung fu style and also notorious for his cruelty to his students. Once again, Wong Fei Hong tries to get out of it, but when he finds himself beaten up by an assassin who has taken out a contract on his father's life, he gains a newfound respect for his training in order to gain revenge. So this was 1978, and so Jackie Chan at this point had been about the Hong Kong cinema scene for a few years, working as a stuntman, doing things like he's in Enter the Dragon for one sequence where Bruce Lee kicks him and Jackie Chan does a massive fall out of into a garden from a great height. And he'd done a few films. He'd been signed up by a film director called Lo Wei, who's quite big in Hong Kong in the 70s. At the point because Bruce Lee had died after Enter the Dragon, and it was the search for the new Bruce Lee, who was going to be the new big martial arts star. And Lo Wei thought maybe it could be Jackie Chan. And he put him in 3 or 4 films which were very much patterned after the Bruce Lee films, which are kind of very serious, the kind of scowling hero, no sense of humour at all. And those films had done terribly at that point. And it was kind of like Jackie Chan, box office poison. But Lo Wei still had him on this contract and he had to find something to do for him. So he actually decided to take a fee from another company to lend Jackie Chan to them for 2 films in 1978. The first was Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, and then later in the year, Drunken Master. These films are kind of what broke Jackie Chan as a star, because they actually treated him very differently. He's allowed to show his sense of humour, allowed to be much more charming on screen and just generally a bit silly. His own personality was able to come through a lot more, and that's kind of what launched Jackie Chan's stardom. So Snake in the Eagle's Shadow was directed by Yuen Woo-ping, who's now famous internationally after things like he did this fight choreography for the Matrix trilogy and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but he directed this film. It was his first. Snake in the Eagle's Shadow was his first film as director, and Drunken Master is second. And I find these films a lot more fun just because joke a minute and Jackie Chan's able to just let it be fun rather than trying to be this big tough guy. Because the difference between Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee is if Bruce Lee finds himself surrounded by kind of 6 or 8 guys, he will take them all on, no trouble at all, they're gone. Jackie Chan finds himself in that situation, he'll run away. So I guess Jackie Chan's a little bit more relatable in that sense.
Had there been a sort of like strand of like comedy kung fu in Hong Kong cinema prior to Jackie Chan? Because it does feel like he found his niche, and he'd spent, like you say, he'd spent many years trying to find, knocking around. He'd done a film with John Woo at the start of John Woo's career. He'd been around for a while in like and doing a lot of small roles and stunt roles and extra roles, but he came to the fore with these comedy roles. And you think about the bigger stars from the previous, Bruce Lee, Jimmy Wang Yu, who again was very serious. in his persona. Had you had that comedy kung fu before?
I think he had comedy kung fu films, but I think it was after years of Bruce Lee and stuff like that, when the films were arch series and people suddenly realised they could do something different with it, and the audience was ready for it, and Jackie Chan was in prime position to take advantage of that. As enormously talented as Jackie Chan is as a martial artist, he's not a physically imposing person in terms of, he's not particularly tall, he's not broad-shouldered. He could definitely beat you up, but you wouldn't, if you just saw him in the street, you would not think, oh, he looks a bit scary.
Most people could beat me up though, Pete. So I don't really consider a bar to hurdle over.
I think Jackie Chan was able to bring all this wonderful choreography and the lightness of touch that maybe was missing, at least in the big Hong Kong films for a while before that. I won't claim to be an expert in the history of Hong Kong cinema. I'm sure there'll be people saying, but what about this film in 1973?
Well, I guess it's more about building the star around the comedy kung fu. You can probably have, I don't feel like there was a star that had taken that route.
Yeah.
Style of films before Jackie Chan, where it was like it was comedy, but it was an action film. It was packed with kung fu. I mean, there's fight a minute in this film. You know, it's like, you know, they fight more than they talk in this film, even though they talk quite a lot. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So you just feel like they crystallized into his persona in these two movies.
Very cleverly built as a showcase for his skill set, I guess. The uncle character as well, he's portrayed as an elderly man. He's played by Yuen Woo-ping's father, actually.
Yeah, I read that.
And he's kind of made up to be in his 70s, but he's probably only 50 odd at the point making this, and he's still really nimble, got all the skills and stuff. And the interplay between them when they're doing all the stuff with like the teapots and things, it's kind of like can't let the teapot hit the floor and things like that. Kind of delightful how they managed to. There is a kind of a high stakes plot in the film, but it doesn't matter that much.
No, it's more built around the tropes of the training and the unruly pupil, and it's more built around that than it is around that you say the high stakes plot.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's a really great villain,
Thunderfoot.
Yeah, played by Hwang Jang Lee, who was a real life Taekwondo master from South Korea. And he's got this, because it's a very big contrasted styles, because he's Taekwondo, so he's all high kicks and flying jumps and stuff, compared with Jackie Chan, kind of this drunken style where he's all about fluid movements in his body. And there's a very different style, and the contrast is really great, I think. And it's the final battle, and it's great between the two of them. If you want to get started with martial arts cinema, I think it's a great entry point, just because it's a fun film. The plot's very simple. You don't really need to pay that much attention to it. The plot was borrowed for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, of course, 20 years later. Is my contention. It's about an unruly young man who's sent to live with his uncle to sort him out.
I must admit, I didn't see the massive amount of parallels with that in the quite trope of sending an unruly student away to learn manners. But yes, now you mention it, it is exactly like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Fresh Prince of Bel-Air added more kind of Carlton dancing to Tom Jones.
I remember when I was growing up, Jackie Chan movies and getting them on video in this country was not always the easiest thing.
Yeah,
they were until like the late 90s when they were pumping them out on DVD. You didn't get things like Armor of God and Winners and Sinners and those kind of like 80s Jackie Chan movies. They didn't really. It felt like they were tricky to get hold of. I remember Armor of God being one of those ones where I need to see Armor of God. It's the one where Jackie Chan nearly died. You know, those, and being very disappointed when I watched it. Falls off a wall, doesn't he? It's like, okay.
But he does then put that footage in the end credits as well. So
which apparently, I was reading, he apparently got the idea of that from the Cannonball Run series.
Yeah.
Appearing in those, and he loved the fact that they would put all the outtakes on there, so he did it after that in all of his movies.
Yeah, but rather than Burt Reynolds flubbing his lines, it's Jackie Chan nearly killing himself. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, which is, you know, you work to your strengths, don't you?
Well, supposedly that's also his way of warning children in the audience: don't try and copy Jackie. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, but the other, I say, you mentioned it already, the Yuen Woo-ping, massive influence on, I guess, on Western vision of martial arts movies. Because of his choreography in The Matrix. Again, another film I remember him being a big hit for him was Iron Monkey in the early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
That was one of those ones where it was like, oh my God, you got to see that.
Yeah, I remember there's a long time since I saw that. I still remember an amazing sequence where they're kind of fighting on these poles, like a courtyard full of poles, and they can't touch the ground, and may even be fire beneath the poles, if I'm remembering right. And there's kind of a whole 10-minute fight sequence constructed with them leaping on tiptoes between these poles, and stuff like that. There have been good martial arts films made in the West, but kind of like you can see that Hong Kong's been at it for 40, 50 years, and it's just ingrained in a different way. But
well, the ones that seem to benefited from his choreography, who I mean, like, obviously he did Kill Bill as well. I found he did Kung Fu Hustle as well, the choreography for Kung Fu Hustle, which was again another big film that forwarded the case of martial arts movies in the Western world, I guess.
Yeah, well, that one was interesting as well because it was kind of melding classic kung fu choreography with CGI special effects and kind of pulling it off. There's a tradition there of Peking opera and everything, and there are just people who will, kind of like Jackie Chan spent his childhood in a Peking opera school teaching him all these skills from when he was 5 or 6, something like that. And just it's such ingrained in the culture in a way that there's plenty of people in the West who do martial arts, but there's not many of them who've been taught it full-time at school from the age of 6. And there's a whole kind of generations of stuntmen from Hong Kong who've come out of that tradition, and maybe there's also a more willingness to take chances on sets in Hong Kong as well, which does result in things like Jackie Chan nearly destroying his own skull, but also...
Are you saying the health and safety is probably not as a higher priority as it is in maybe on Hollywood pictures?
Maybe not in the 70s. I won't want, maybe these days there's probably a bit different, but yeah, there's more willingness to, I'll jump off there for you. Yeah, I'll fall off that.
Well, talking about things that you probably can't get cleared by health and safety, let's move on to our next one. What about Old Boy? We're talking about Vengeance trilogy. Park Chan-wook's Vengeance trilogy. Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Lady Vengeance. And things you couldn't do in Western movies. I guess eating a live octopus is probably one of them up there. It's quite high.
Yeah, and the actor who did eat that live octopus apparently was a vegetarian Buddhist, and prayed for forgiveness to the octopus before each take. That's the legend, anyway. These are the 3 films I've chosen for South Korea, because South Korean cinema wasn't particularly prominent internationally up until maybe the late 90s, and then suddenly it had an explosion. And there was probably the first one was a film called Shiri, which is a late 90s spy thriller, which did quite well and did really well at home in South Korea, but then also snuck out onto a few international markets in a way that not many South Korean films had before. And then suddenly there was a bit of a boom, and Park Chan-wook, the director of these Vengeance trilogy, was kind of at the forefront of that. First with a film he made in the year 2000 called Joint Security Area, which is a thriller set on the border between North and South Korea, and it's kind of about these South Korean soldiers and North Korean soldiers who meet in the middle, and it sounds cheesy. It's a very cheesy plot when you say it out loud, kind of realise they're not so different after all, but then of course it gets a bit more complicated than that. And that was a huge hit in South Korea. I think it might have been the biggest box office hit in South Korea up to that point. And then he was kind of able to pull off this trilogy and made 3 films in, I think, 5 years, starting with Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, which is a really complicated plot to this film, but I'll try and do a quick setup for it. So, deaf-mute factory worker Ryu has recently lost his job and has need of a kidney transplant. Deceived, penniless, and utterly helpless, he seeks a way out of his situation by kidnapping his former boss's young daughter. Of course, this being a film and a kidnapping, things do not go to plan, and Ryu soon finds himself trapped in a downward spiral of violence and bloodshed when Park Dong-jing, the pained father of the missing girl, begins a hunt for retribution. And I think this is a really interesting take on the Vengeance thriller, in that kind of there's not really a good guy and a bad guy. Pretty quickly in the film, you kind of say, they've kind of got valid reasons to be. I mean, they're both doing horrible things, but you can kind of see why they're doing it. Neither of them's out and out evil in a way that maybe if this was a Hollywood film, you'd have a clear demarcation between good guy and bad guy. So you kind of flip-flops between the two of them as they kind of develop this little dance around each other as they kind of work their way towards each other over the 2 hours of the film. And it's a really well done film. I think the plot goes in some really unexpected directions. There's stuff in it that you've never seen in a film before. Because one of the lead characters is a deaf mute, there's a sex scene where him and his girlfriend are having sex but communicating through sign language during it, which is a scene I've never seen before or after, and things like that. And should say that the lead performances are great. Ryu's played by an actor called, I'm going to murder this as well, Ha Kyun Shin, who has had he's famous in South Korea. He's had quite a big career in South Korean cinema. But the other character, Park, the father of the kidnapped girl, is played by Song Kang-ho, who's probably now the most famous South Korean actor in the world after Parasite last year, in which he played the father of the family that moves into the rich people's home. And he's had kind of gone from strength to strength for the last 20 years since this film, because he's been in nearly all of Bong Joon-ho's films, like The Host and Memories of Murder. It's in Snowpiercer, Bong Joon-ho's English language film. And he's brilliant in it as well. There's a scene in this film where, it's not really a spoiler because it happens quite early in the film, his daughter does end up dying because of this botched kidnapping. And he's required to attend his daughter's autopsy. And the whole scene's just played on his face. You don't see any blood, gore, anything. You just see his father watching his daughter go through an autopsy, and he plays this 2-minute unbroken shot, something like that, and you just see it all play out on his face, and it's absolutely stunning, kind of horrifying at the same time. Yeah, so what do you think of this film, Adam?
Well, I saw it on release. I saw it, and I was fortunate to be working at Metro Cinema in Derby when this was released, and all three of those played on the big screen. This one being the smallest, I guess, of those releases, didn't really land that well. It obviously landed critically. I don't think it landed commercially in the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, Old Boy was a much easier sell, I guess.
Yeah, Old Boy's got a bit more pizzazz to it. It's a bit.
Well, like
flashy.
you've just done the description of the plot there, and it's quite convoluted, tricky to describe in a nice handy soundbite. Whereas Old Boy, it's like whack on a back of a postcard. Off you go. You know where you're going with.
Old Boy's interesting because it's got an incredibly complex plot by the time the thing's up, but you can say what it's about in 2 sentences at the same time.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's what made that one a much easier sell when that was released a couple of years later.
And Old Boy as well has kind of got a bit more of the kind of overt directorial flourishes to it, kind of things like the famous hallway fight where it just follows him as he works his way through all these henchmen along a corridor over 5 minutes, and kind of a bit more of a directorial show-offy film.
I think the thing I remember most from Sympathy of Mr. Vengeance was just the idea of organ transplants and people being kidnapped and harvested for their organs. Yeah. Being such a weird thing I hadn't even thought about at all before I went into that movie. And it's such a cool, unique idea for a plot. That really stood out for me.
Yeah, the fact that Ryu because he's so hard up for money, he actually signs up to have an organ taken for cash, and then he gets ripped off. So not only is he an organ down, he's not got the cash for it.
It was that thing where it's dumped in a warehouse with like a sewn up organ missing from his liver or something like his kidneys have been taken. That was quite an interesting world that it gave us a little insight into. That stood out for me from first watching it and revisiting it. It's lost none of its power. I think it's one of those unique films where it feels like the first step towards Parasite winning the Oscar. Yeah, in a weird way, and it's like in that Shiri and things like that, and JSA had come over and had a hit, but this felt like the first one that was gaining like Cannes Awards kind of thing.
The directors were being talked about at the high-profile festivals and things like that.
Yeah, and that's obviously gone through now all the way to like this year with Parasite winning the Oscar.
And I suppose Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance probably is the most art house of the three, in that there's barely any music in it. It's all played the soundtrack's all diegetic. Not to get too film studies about it, it's just the sound you would hear if you were in the room when that was happening. There's not things like Old Boy's filled with music, and so's Lady Vengeance. And it's kind of once Park Chan-wook realised, there is an international audience for this film, it's kind of just become a little bit more Hollywood. Not in a bad way, but in a way where they're using things like music and slight like visual lushness in a way that is missing from Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance.
I think one of the things that led to that was like it wasn't. He was making these films, and I guess a lot of South Korean filmmakers were making these films in the same way as Chinese filmmakers, Japan filmmakers made these films for festivals.
Yeah,
they were making them with the idea that we'll do all right in South Korea, and then they'll play the festivals around the world, and then that'll be it. And then you suddenly had this boom in the late 90s where they were being put out on DVD and flying off the shelves. You know, it's just like actually we can actually make. There's actually another audience for these films than just the art house audience. There is a mainstream audience in the West that want to see.
TOS and Asia Extreme. Yeah,
Tartan Video was every month they were releasing another.
Bringing so much stuff over, it's kind of compared to. It's a shame because that was a boom because it kind of you still get some films from Asia released, but not many are making it into cinemas, and the things sneak out onto VOD and you don't even hear about them, and then you have to search. There's much more on the consumer to find this stuff rather than it being presented to you. And I remember growing up, late 90s, being late teens, early 20s, and I could go to the multiplex and they'd have one screen showing something a bit weird, so it would be something like Old Boy or Audition or something like that, and those films will not play multiplexes these days.
Well, possibly not, but with the pandemic hitting, that might change. You know what I mean? You might start seeing some more unusual things playing at multiplexes than you would normally. So,
but Old Boy, one thing it does have is Choi Min-sik in the lead role, who's kind of amazing. Just the fierceness of him in that role, and just like I said, a vegetarian Buddhist, but he throws himself into it to the point that he's willing to eat an octopus live on screen. He's an interesting actor because he doesn't actually work that much. I was looking at his credits and he's done about a film a year for the last 20 years. So he's only made kind of 20 films. Where off the back of Old Boy, he could have, if he'd wanted to learn some English, he could have gone to Hollywood and played villains as much as he wanted, really. He was a villain in the Luc Besson Lucy film, which I guess is made in France, and he speaks South Korean only in that, and that's the only time he's ventured outside South Korea. And he's done some great stuff as well, but kind of like Old Boy's going to be the film when he dies, hopefully not for a long time, that'll be the top of his obituary. It'll be Old Boy actor Choi Min-sik.
Yeah, well, as it will with most of the people involved with that movie. I think even the director, I don't think the director has the director done anything as big as impactful as Old Boy since then. He's done quite a lot of great stuff, but
he's done a lot of great films, but nothing that's quite kind of, I think, reached a mainstream consciousness in the same way.
I mean, The Handmaiden was a couple of years ago, wasn't it? That did really well at the UK box office. But again, I don't think that's gonna. I don't think people are gonna say that's gonna be the second one after Old Boy.
And Lady Vengeance as well is. How do you feel about it? I feel it's the worst of the three.
Yeah, people say that. I really like Lady Vengeance, and I don't know. Maybe it's just I am attracted to the underdog, and it's had so many people talk about it as like, well, it's not. It's the least of the three, so I stand up for it. But I think with its focus on female vengeance,
yes,
rather than the very male-dominated first two, it adds something different to the thematic trilogy.
I'm by no means saying it's a bad film. It's kind of like I'd say Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is a 9 out of 10. Old Boy's an 8 out of 10. Lady Vengeance is a 7 out of 10. It's still a fantastically entertaining film, really stylish, great performances. Choi Min-sik's back in it again, but he's the villain this time, and he's complete kind of antithesis of his character in Old Boy as well. He's the villain, but he's also kind of almost pitiful, despite being kind of pure evil at the same time, playing this teacher who's doing terrible things to his pupils. I think it's got a great lead character as well. I'm going to struggle with this name, but it's Lee Young-ai, I think that's how you say it, playing the Lady Vengeance of the title. I think she's great in it, and kind of got this steel to her. It's quite interesting as well. It's kind of consciously kind of a capper to the trilogy, because the director Park Chan-wook's kind of doing little callbacks to things in the first two films. Actors from the first two films will just turn up for a very brief cameo. They're not significant roles. He could cast anyone in there, but no, he's casting Song Kang-ho in a one scene part and things like that. So he knows people are going to be watching it going, oh yeah, that's the guy from the first film, sort of thing. So there's also Lady Vengeance has also got a very interesting thing that it's got a director's cut version, which is exactly the same as the original version in terms of the editing. The film is exactly the same length, all the scenes are exactly the same, but he's changed the colours. Over the course of the, say, 2 hours and a bit of the film, the colour slowly drains out of the film to the point that you'd barely notice it to begin with. But by the time the final scene of the film, it's in black and white. It's kind of a thematic thing to maybe show the kind of the descent of the main character, maybe.
Let's move on from Lady Vengeance and the Vengeance trilogy. That's opened up the world to South Korean cinema. And we'll move on to another film that opened up the world to anime cinema, I guess. So we're going to go into Japanese anime, and we're going to look at Akira.
Yeah, I should preface this by saying I do love Asian cinema and probably know more about it than a lot of people, but I'm by no means an expert in anime. There's a lot of anime films I like, but I'm very aware that there's anime fans who they like anime and that's their thing. And they whilst they watch a lot of Japanese content, that is all. Anime is 99.9% of it, and so I like a lot of anime, but not to that extreme sort of thing. So I'm sure I'm always very wary when I'm introducing an anime at Quad that there's going to be people in the audience who know more about it than me, because people who love anime really love anime.
But Akira, I guess Akira is one of those ones where it kind of transcends the genre of anime in some ways, in that it's not just an anime, is it? It's a huge film that went worldwide, opened up the world to the idea of, I guess, definitely the UK, the idea of animation for adults, which I don't think have been around before.
Not in the same way. I think Akira is an interesting one because it is definitely a anime landmark, but it's also kind of from 1987, so 30 years later, it's now also a sci-fi and cyberpunk landmark where it'll just get references and conversations about sci-fi and cyberpunk. The fact that it's animated, the fact that it's Japan is kind of secondary to some people.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, a lot of people talk about it as one of the cornerstones of cyberpunk, with Blade Runner and Neuromancer by William Gibson, the novel. Yeah. So it's one of those ones where it's like cross genres, cross platforms, cross media, I guess.
If you're interested in Asian cinema, you definitely are aware of Akira and have seen it and know what it's about. But do you want me to do a little? It's a hard one to summarise briefly.
Well, yeah, it's not entirely successful in its own plot, is it? So let's say no.
So I'll go for this. In 2019, Kaneda is a bike gang leader whose close friend Tetsuo has become involved in a government secret project aiming to produce psychic powers in its subjects. Aiming to save Tetsuo, Kaneda runs into a group of anti-government activists, greedy politicians, irresponsible scientists, and a powerful military leader. The confrontation sparks off Tetsuo's supernatural powers, leading to bloody death and a final battle in the Olympic Stadium where Akira's secrets were buried 30 years ago. Akira being the first child that the government attempted to do these experiments on to produce ESP-type powers in them. You say it's not successful in its own plot, because what's interesting about this is by writer-director Katsuhiro Otomo, who also wrote and drew the original manga that it's based on, but he actually stopped doing the manga for a couple of years to make the film. The manga was not complete at the point that the film was made, and the manga, now it is, he did go back and finish it afterwards, and it's about 2,000 pages, so you'd need probably 6 or 8 hours to tell that story. So he kind of remixes it in a weird way. So he takes the main characters, he takes a lot of the thematics and plot elements, but it creates an entirely new story with them. I have read the manga, not for quite a long time, but in the film, Akira, this child from this ethereal presence that just kind of is just off, slightly out of view through most of the film, and is talked about in hushed whispers, but he's an active participant in the manga. In the film, is not. Quite clever how Otomo, he gives characters from the manga who are kind of significant characters with storylines and things, they'll just pop up for a scene. And in the same way in Lady Vengeance, he'll put the actors in from the previous films. Otomo's dropping things in for people who've read the manga to go, oh yeah, that's the leader of the cult from the manga. And the cult's not in the film at all, but you'll see, and there's one sequence where you see this weird chanting lady with a weird hat on, and she's from the manga and things like that. I don't know, this film's kind of got a lot of iconic visuals in it as well, which I think.
Well, I think that's one of the things it's successful. It is massively successful in is that it just feels huge. You know, it just feels like. I mean, that's what I'm a big fan of, like the hand drawn animation, and this one just is the perfect example of why hand drawn animation is amazing. Here you go. Look at this wonderful sprawling set. That's on screen in front of you now. It's a beautiful animated movie. You kind of get the sense of that like weird kinetic energy in this movie, and you get that's like you do that thing with the bikes where they like leave a trail of color as they're speeding through. Like little things like that where you don't get that in live action. You wouldn't get that in live action, but in animation, it just boom, lifts everything and makes it feel wonderful. You know,
it's got so many sequences that are just wonderful in that, like, as an animation showcase, I guess, in the same way. Like that opening bike chase is about 3-4 minutes long, where they're just speeding through Neo Tokyo, as they call it, the two bike gangs battling each other, and there's so much stuff in there where you just, the amount of work that's gone into it is amazing, kind of boggling. And I think it's amazing in terms of, I think it was the most expensive anime produced up until that point.
Yeah, I think Kiki's Delivery Service topped it the next year, didn't it?
Yeah, but Kiki's Delivery Service is kind of a family film aimed by an established director who's kind of one of the leading animation directors in the world. Akira's made by an animation sort of novice working off his own material. It's kind of amazing that they were able to raise such a budget for this. It's very adult in its subjects. There's a very violent in places. There's a little bit of nudity, and it's kind of like they were to make the most expensive animated film ever in the West. It would not be a hugely violent, adult-oriented film. It would be a Pixar film or something like that. That's one of the things I do like about anime, is that they are willing to explore, not exclusively, but mostly would be avoided in Western animated film.
Well, that's one of the things that the boom of sort of like anime in the UK, we tended to get a lot of that kind of stuff. The Manga UK label that were bringing over animes to the UK on video, they tended to go for the adult stuff. They tended to go for Ninja Scroll and Ghost in the Shell, and
they were very canny and introducing it as kind of a new thing and making it cool.
Yeah,
I guess it kind of was late 80s into the 90s, and I remember very much when I was kind of 11, 12 being aware of it as tapes being passed around at school of things that we probably weren't strictly old enough to be watching, but it was cool. I think they did a really good job at kind of making it something new and different and not your usual kids cartoons sort of thing.
But it's one of those things where they did such a good job of it that when Studio Ghibli started to try and break the market, they were having trouble because we thought of the UK generally thought of anime as adult.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of took until, I guess, 2000s or so with Spirited Away for a big family-oriented anime film to have an impact. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, they had a little bit of groundwork with Princess Mononoke and Neil Gaiman doing the English translation.
Yeah.
Kind of brought it to the attention of some people that were watching anime but not particularly would have been interested in this, but they were.
Princess Mononoke is quite a good middle ground, I guess, because it's got the cute creatures and stuff, but at the same time, it's still there's some quite strong violence in it. I remember the characters get their arms chopped off and things like that, which probably you wouldn't necessarily be showing to a 6-year-old. And it's quite adult in terms of its themes and stuff, because Princess Mononoke is another film where there's no real bad guy.
No.
It's quite complex plotting in that way, where tension is required. It's not like a film where you can sit it down and let it wash over you. You've got to be engaged throughout, otherwise you'll be lost within 10-15 minutes. Yeah. And
that boom of sort of like Studio Ghibli around Spirited Away, and the Barbican did a tour of the UK where they played all of Studio Ghibli's films.
Yeah.
They went on a bit of mini tour in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, so I think the first one I saw was Porco Rosso at Sheffield Showroom. It must have been that tour. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was.
And then late 90s, all the films were coming out on DVD in Hong Kong, as it's Hong Kong, a British territory at that point. They all had English subtitles, so I imported all of them around there. There was a period where I was going around making everyone watch My Neighbor Totoro. Yeah.
As you should, as one of those the rites of passage. When you see that, you pass it on, and you tell everyone you know what a great movie My Neighbor Totoro is. So that's the law, isn't it? So, yeah. Cool. Okay, so let's move on to our final. We've left this one to the end but it's a relatively new film, One Cut of the Dead. For people who are listening to this podcast now, we are going to discuss the entirety of the plot. So if you haven't seen this film, now's the time to say goodbye. We will catch up with you on the next podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to this.
No,
we will see you again soon.
They should go and watch One Cut of the Dead, then come back and listen to the rest, because it's a wonderful, wonderful film, and they will benefit from seeing it. So
yeah, it's one of those ones where when you suggested it, because I watched it this weekend for the first time, I'd avoided the spoilers for this film amazingly. I don't quite know how we would have discussed it without revealing the spoilers, basically, because it's a very. I don't think we'll be doing the film justice.
Yeah, because I showed this at Satori Screen, and I had managed to see a screener before, and I'd loved it, and I knew an audience was going to love it, but actually finding a way to communicate that to them without spoiling it is hugely difficult, because it's a film that so much of the effect comes from kind of the peeling of the onion as the film goes on, where layers upon layers upon layers, and they cast light on what you've already seen before and make you think about things in a new way. And it's incredibly cleverly constructed film in that way.
Do you want to explain the plot then, Peter?
Okay.
People who've already seen it.
People who've already seen it. So it's kind of a film told in 3 sections. So the opening section is a 37-minute, I believe, non-stop one-take sequence with a mobile camera following the characters in and out. And it's set in a rundown water plant where a small film crew is making a zero-budget zombie movie, reportedly had been the site of military experiments in the past. And this seems to be confirmed when real-life zombies appear and attack the crew. So that's part 1. And then part 2, it goes back in time, and we see the director of that film being commissioned to make his zombie film. And we get about half an hour, something like that, of seeing his preparations to shoot his zombie film, his troubles with the various actors, and his family troubles at the same time, because his daughter and wife become involved for various plot reasons. Then part 3 is where it all kind of neatly fits together, and we see part 1 again, but from the behind the scenes perspective. And so all these things that happened in part 1, where you are basically saying, that's a bit weird, why is that happening? You discover it's because of all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes in the making of this film. And it's so cleverly done. It's a lot of big laughs in this film, I'd say. Yeah. Did you enjoy it in that way, Adam?
I did. I mean, it kind of, like I say, I went in there expecting a zombie movie, and it almost immediately became one of my top 5 films about filmmaking movies.
Yeah. And
it's like, actually, this is not a zombie movie at all. It's got nothing to do with zombies, really. It's like Citizen Kane's about newspapers. It's like, no, it's that kind of thing. It's like, it is the Citizen Kane of movie-making movies.
Yeah, it's like anyone I know that's had a go at making films on a low-budget level, I recommend this film to them, because I know they will be able to relate in so many ways.
There's so many laughs and so many painful reminders of things that you go through on set, dealing with actors, dealing with set designers, dealing with plot points, dealing with script editors, all that kind of thing. And also dealing with those troubleshooting moments where something's gone wrong, we need to fix it right now. And they fix it. And it's one of those wonderful, heartwarming, innovative, encapsulates the movie making experience, where it shows all the troubles and it shows the difficult with the actors, difficulty with the set, but you do feel for the crew, and that's that sense of the crew being a unified,
it's kind of
heartwarming family kind of thing really comes together.
A common goal, and all coming together at the end to make this goal of making a quite bad zombie movie.
Yeah, and comes together symbolically at the end with them on the little human pyramid.
Yeah, and it becomes, you're fully on, you want them to succeed making this quite bad zombie movie. That it becomes a noble goal throughout the course of this. You're fully supporting them, and the family stuff in it works really well as well. With this director character, he's got a daughter who wants to work in film as well, and he's kind of sort of wants to support her, but at the same time he's focused on his project and he's trying to keep her at arm's length because she's a distraction. But then she's kind of the one who comes through and saves the day in the end. And it's actually creeps up on you as quite a moving film in a weird way. Yeah.
I mean, I think the one thing that I didn't like as much was the mother character's sort of method acting immersion. I thought that was it was funny. It was funny, but it didn't feel It felt sitcom funny rather than real life funny.
Yeah, it's probably not the most believable element of the film, but it made me laugh. And just
It did, yeah, it did, yeah.
just shouting "Pom" is guaranteed to make me laugh now. And are you aware there's a sequel to this film, Adam?
I did know that, but now after having now seen it, I'm not quite sure why, I guess more than how, why they've done a sequel.
Well,
it is
basically, it's a half-hour thing that the director did earlier this year when lockdown hit, and he basically decided, what can I do with the resources available to us from lockdown as kind of a morale-raising exercise for him and his friends in the cast and crew, as well as the people who have loved One Cut of the Dead. So he basically, I think he wrote a script in a day, sent it to all his cast and crew, and they filmed stuff on phone, filmed themselves on phones and using things like Zoom. And he's edited it all together and just put it on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
It's free. It's called there's an English subtitle version now as well, called One Cut of the Dead Mission Remote. And it's not on the same level as One Cut of the Dead, but it's a fun half hour. It's definitely worth seeking out if you've enjoyed One Cut of the Dead, because it's just nice to see the characters again, if nothing else. Because by the end of One Cut of the Dead, you're really fond of this little crew. So I'd recommend people go and find that on YouTube.
Yeah. It does nail that film grading crew, and it also nails the fact that movies are made fairly similarly all around the world.
Yeah,
they're the same problems on a Japanese set as the same problems on a US set, a UK set, French set. It's a great leveler in that respect. The films, there's no difference.
Yeah, I think that's been reflected in the success of this film as well, because it was I think the budget is quoted as being the equivalent of about $25,000, which is that's nothing at all. That's not a day shooting on most films. So they shot in 8 days. They're pretty much all non-professionals. I think the director had done a few shorts and stuff before, but he was basically funding this himself. And the fact that it's gone on to play around the world, I think is quoted as it's now made 1,000 times its budget back. The most profitable film in history, overtaking the Blair Witch Project. It just shows that there is ingenuity. People say it's all been done, but there are people out there finding ingenious ways to do new things, and cheaply as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what's next for the director, Shinichiro Ueda?
I believe he had co-directed a film the year after this that I've read a couple of reviews, and it's not got very good reviews. It doesn't seem to have left Japan, so I don't know. It's one of those. Will it be the one? Like Blair Witch Project is probably a good equivalent, because the directors of that have kept working, but they've never quite impinged on the consciousness in the same way. And
but this movie is so cleverly written. You'd think you can't just have that one in your back catalogue. You can't. You've got to have more, because this is so clever that you think, well, this guy's got to have more talent to show.
Or is it kind of like with bands when there's second album syndrome, where bands have put out the first album, which they've had a lifetime to write and prepare for and work on, and then they're told, right, you've got a year to do the next one, and the second one's terrible because they've only had a year. So is it going to be that? I don't know. I hope not, because this film, he deserves part to be spoken of as a major Asian filmmaker just off the basis of this, I think, because it's so clever.
Like I said, to the point where there's got to be more from this guy, because it's just so clever. And not just clever, so like you say, you care about those characters, and that's through the acting and through the direction that you end up bonding with those characters in that second act.
Yeah.
And then third act comes in when they're redoing the movie. You want them, like I say, you're on board. You want them to succeed in making this crappy little zombie movie. You just do. So to have that level of skill to craft that in the script and in the direction, there's got to be more.
Yeah, well, he's not short of ambition, I guess, so I'm sure they'll be doing something, because even attempting to make a film on such a low budget where a third of the film is done in one shot is pretty ambitious.
Well, that's what we've done 5 films there, Peter. We've kind of cheated with the Vengeance trilogy and added another 2. Is there any other films that you would want to highlight as reasons to embrace East Asian cinema?
Loads. It's very difficult. Just narrowing it down just to a few to talk about on it was actually pretty difficult. I nearly chose a film called Love Exposure, which is a Japanese film from 2008. Which is probably my favourite film of the 21st century so far. It's a 4-hour drama about love, religion, cults, cross-dressing, evil versus good, everything. It's all in one film. It's I tell people it's a 4-hour film, and that is off-putting. I get that, but you can watch it as kind of a mini-series. If you were to stream this film, it's all divided up into chapters, so each chapter's not more than an hour. So you can just pause at a chapter and come back the next day to watch some more.
Well, you can, but like the Irishman was long.
True.
And people watched that, so stop being so frigging crap and get out there and watch a 4-hour movie.
Yeah. And I saw this film at the cinema at Leeds Film Festival, which must have been 2009 or 10, I guess. And that was a busy Hyde Park Picture House, and it went down gangbusters throughout. They did have an interval, but there was a palpable kind of excitement during this interval because people are loving it so much. It's such a vibrant film, got great performances. It goes in all sorts of directions that you won't see coming, and that's one definitely to check out, I think. And then there's another one I really love is I think it's from a year or two before that, is a Adrift in Tokyo, which is kind of a much more, I'd describe it more as kind of a Japanese take on an American indie movie, because it's about two characters. Basic plot is there's this slacker guy student who's heavily in debt, and a Yakuza debt collector comes to see him and basically says to him, you've got 72 hours to pay this debt back or bad things are going to happen. But kind of a set up for a sort of a crime thriller in a weird way. But then the difference is when he returns 72 hours later and the student hasn't got any money, this debt collector says to him, okay, actually, I'll pay your debt off for you. But for me to do that, you've got to do, there's one condition, and that condition is you've got to join me as I go on a walk across. And then the rest of the film is just these two characters walking through Tokyo, kind of getting to know each other, encountering, it's a little bit episodic as they encounter various other characters that drop in and out. And it goes in some really unexpected directions. It's in a similar way to One Cut of the Dead. By the end of the film, you really care about these two guys. And this Yakuza character, who at the start of the film just seems like a bit of a kind of a bruiser, not someone sympathetic at all. By the end of the film, you actually love this guy. And the lead character is played by an actor called Joe Odagiri, who I really like, who's been in a lot of really great Japanese films. It's kind of like before Disney swallowed Johnny Depp and ruined him with the Pirates of the Caribbean film, when Johnny Depp suddenly decided, I'm only going to make the films that pay me $30 million at this point, when Johnny Depp was doing interesting indies and playing believable humans. Joe Odagiri is kind of him, but for Japan, and he's maintained an interest in playing interesting roles in indie films, low budget stuff. So I'd really recommend people check out Adrift in Tokyo. There's no great high stakes to it. It's basically just two guys walking around. You get to see a side of Tokyo that's not often thought of when people think of Japanese cinema. It's no touristy stuff to it at all. It's literally just lots of little back streets and suburbs. Definitely worth seeking out. It's very funny in a lot of places as well.
Cool. Well, we'll call it a day on that there, Peter. You are running monthly Satori Screen Nights at Quad in Derby from when we reopen, I guess.
Yeah. Hopefully.
So if you're here in Derby or you want to travel to Derby, Pete will be here once a month showing the best in East Asian cinema and the worst.
Yeah, pretty broad spectrum, but always something interesting, I'd say, regardless of the actual objective quality of the film.
Cool. Thank you very much for joining us, Pete, and we will speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to the podcast. We are here every 2 weeks, so join us again in 2 weeks. Hopefully we'll have Daryl back. We might even, fingers crossed, have soon Rebecca back from furlough, so she hopefully will be rejoining the team in the future. Other than that, we'll speak to you soon, and take care. Bye-bye.